Hi, all. Welcome to Strategic Success, Predicting Your Company's Future. This is Anissa Avon. I am the CEO and founder of Turnkey Coaching Solutions. And we also have on our webinar today, Roger Blaker, who I'm going to introduce momentarily. And I want to acknowledge and thank David Whitmarsh with the Whitmarsh Consulting Group for putting this together for us. I am very jazzed about this topic, strategic planning, being intentional in life and in business is one of my very big passions. And so just to take care of a little bit of housekeeping, if you're on the call, welcome. You are muted, but there is a chat feature over there, so don't hesitate to type a message out if you have any questions or comments. We would love to hear your feedback and input. And the process that we're going to talk about today is about creating a crystal ball, so to speak, for companies to review what it's going to take for them to be intentional in regards to driving for results and their strategy. So I want to tell you very briefly a little bit about Turnkey Coaching Solutions, and then I'm going to turn it over to Roger and introduce Roger. Turnkey I'm very proud of what we have accomplished. Turnkey is an enterprise coaching, training, and human resource development company. We support organizations in developing comprehensive leadership development programs, whether that is in executive development or high pose or even frontline managers. We do everything from HR consulting to succession planning consulting to coaching, executive coaching and training. We have over 400 professionals around the country that support our engagements, and I'll just say all of them smarter than I am, which I'm very excited about. So we're surrounding myself with so many phenomenal experts, and Roger happens to be one of them. So I am very grateful that Roger is on the Turnkey team. Roger and I have worked together over 10 years. He is one of our most sought-after coaches and trainers. Roger has an interesting background. His areas of specialty in the training world is communications, emotional intelligence, executive coaching, strategic planning, succession planning. He is a certified behavior analyst and continues to pursue a passion in understanding leadership competency, leadership development, and behavior change. He is also a certified values analyst. And in his former career, he he was a certified project manager. But before he stepped into the training and coaching world, he spent, which I want to say he started training and coaching full-time in 2003. So bravo for being in this wonderful consulting role for so long, Roger. But before this role, he spent 25 years in project management leadership roles. He worked for Fortune 100 corporations supporting their internal leaders and executive clients in developing strategies to enhance their business through technology efficiencies and project management initiatives. So my understanding, Roger, is that you had to develop a very high level of performance in your capacity to think strategically as well as to communicate effectively.
Yeah, it gave me the opportunity to deal with that challenge. So yes, that's what guided me to finally realize that I wanted to work with people more in their development and focus as much on the business side of things. So absolutely.
I thought so. And I'm going to hand it over to you. The one thing, though, that I wanted to share about Roger that he really lives and breathes is one time he said to me that, you know, his favorite quote was, "Don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive and go do that." Because what the world needs is for people who have come alive. And when Roger talks about strategic success and strategic planning, it is something that he knows backwards and forwards, but he also feels very passionate about. So Roger, tell us about what are we going to learn today in this strategic success webinar?
Well, thank you, Anissa. And every time I hear that quote, even though it's years ago, it still moves me. So thank you for that. And welcome, everyone, to Strategic Success, Predicting Your Company's Future webinar. How to use analytics to identify your company's success probability and what to do about it. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'll start with this, that you may wonder sometimes when you look at this, what's this got to do with HR and that kind of thing? Well, what I'm going to cover with you today, you're going to see that what we identify, that a lot of challenges happen, most often is to do with people and the relationships and those kinds of things. So that's the reason we thought it was important to present this to HR people who are interested in that side of the business, because that's where Turnkey lives. So I want to begin by filling in the background and the history before we talk about the subject and how it relates to you and your organization. And the information that we'll be sharing today is based on James Fisher's book, Navigating the Growth Curve. So that's where we have the foundation of what we're going to lead through and talk about today and where it came from. And at a time when there was a lot of research being done and there were books being written about good to great and top grading that really focused on large organizations, James Fisher came around to really want to look at small to mid-market companies. And what his research and what he wrote about was what's being done in those organizations and how can we look at their stages of growth and identify the challenges that they're going to be facing. So in the late 90s, early 2000s, James Fisher had an ambitious goal. He's the co-founder of Origin Institute. It's a research and consulting company out of Boulder, Colorado. And he wanted to understand and decipher the patterns and behaviors and those characteristics in entrepreneurial enterprises of the small to mid-market size, and then develop best practices to help those companies better navigate the trials and tribulations of their business growth. And we all have heard and you know that the majority of the people employed are in the small business, mid-market size businesses. And also the research over some decades now has been repeatable that companies in first 5 years to 10 years, most of those companies go out of business. Now, some of them could be because of what the product and service they provide may have not sustained itself, but most of them often are the results of the poor planning and the chaos and disorganization that are surrounded by people and those kinds of challenges. And so that's one of the things that really was, through this research, came out. So James spent about 6 years going through the research, and he talked to around 650 CEOs of these company sizes. Then he published his findings from his research. And from that research, he defined a roadmap that he described as these 7 predictable stages of growth in these companies that they move through. And that's from startup to 500 employees. And that was across 35 different industries. And the thing that really jumped out at him that I guess was substantiated, even though it's probably thought to be the issue, but what he substantiated, that the complexity level of an organization is based on the head count through these different stages. So after he published his findings, since he had built relationships with many of these CEOs, he published the findings, and he ended up meeting with several of them. And because of what he was showing those CEOs and what he found out about, the ones that were the strongest and most functioning, many CEOs saw there was a gap between what he saw as really vibrant, healthy companies and where they were, and so they hired him as a consultant to help them navigate through this process. And the CEOs and the teams really loved this, especially for the insights the model gave them. Now, there's another thing you can do, too. If you want to find out more about James Fisher, you can go to his website, sustainablebusinessgrowth.com, and it's chock full of practical information for navigating the stage. So this is a quote, James Fisher's book that he published that was these findings. Every living thing has an ideal path of growth, including a commercial enterprise. This growth curve is directed by the laws of proportion, rhythm, and adaptability. Navigating the growth curve is truly the art of growing your organization along the fine line between chaos and order. It's learning the art of growing your organization along the fine line in chaos and order. And that chaos, much of it, is from the issues and problems that come as an organization adds more people, and how that's either managed well or not, and the people being in the right place, those kinds of things in organization. So the summary of the solution here that James Fisher identified is a profit-driven, people-centered, growth-smart organization. That people-centered, right in the center of this timeline, this line here, is why we really think it's important that we end up speaking to people that really are involved, engaged in the development of people, because that's where much of the problems that you'll see as we go a little further into this really come from. And there's something that can be done about it. So, how does this translate to you and your organization today? How can it benefit your CEO and his or her leaders? Imagine that your company's leadership has a crystal ball, or what we call an X-ray, as we define it. Then it can expose the reality of your organization. And not only that, but it can accurately identify the challenges in the future and provide a roadmap on how to prepare for those challenges. This is what the growth curve X-ray is all about. These report examples that you're looking at right here, they are generated when these leaders, the CEO and his or her direct reports, respond to the X-ray instrument. The reports will reveal to your leaders understanding of where they believe they are and the priorities they've got going on currently in the stage they're in. And it will identify directly, based on how they respond, to what they see as the reality. And it will expose gaps if there are any. And this is what's really, really key to this. If there are gaps in what is fundamentally, from James's research, the most optimum challenges to be looking at and not worrying so much about other things, if there's a gap between what this organization leadership believes that their challenges are compared to what the findings have shown, the gap will show up. And so that exposure is what really happens. I'm sorry?
No, that's okay. I was just going to jump in and say one of the things that we wanted to talk about today is exactly this, using analytics to be strategic about planning the future. It's one thing to sit down in a strategy session and say, here's what we want to accomplish, here's the key performance indicators, now team, let's go do it. This information here, what you're talking about, and correct me if I'm wrong, allows an organization, and you're going to get into this, I'm sure, but allows an organization to compare what they believe are their strategic priorities, as well as how are we operating against, and how are we doing against those strategic priorities, in order to use that data to say, where are our weak spots, what's coming up, what do we need to do better, what are we really doing well, what are we completely clueless about. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, it's exactly. One thing that I really have learned through this process, and it goes along many lines, is we can't really claim something until we name it. And one of the things that I really appreciate about what we've learned about doing this, it narrows down, because one thing about chaos is because there's so many balls in the air, you hear about that, so many things going on, there's no real clarity about what is the main thing to be focused on, the main thing, and what this helps do is really point out and gives a process for them to really determine, are they as an organization focusing on what really needs to be the main thing to focus on. What I find in any kind of thing we're doing instruments like this, it provides information that creates talking points to really help people focus on something. It gives them more depth and a tool to use than maybe just trying to do some kind of organizational meeting and they're trying to figure out what it is, and they all got their different point of views, they got their different assumptions. Well, this is a way to help organize them to get them all pointing in the same direction. So that's a long answer to your question, but that's what this helps them do. And it's not just the reports. Obviously, we as consultants using this help facilitate to drive it, because we're neutral. We're not coming in with a bias that something needs to be a certain way. We're just taking the information that shows here, and we compare it to what Fisher identified, and then it's up to them to kind of decide where they are with that, with us helping guide them through that process. Does that give you a good answer for it?
Yes, thank you.
That's the reason why this is key, and that's the reason I wanted to bring this up early, is because this is the part where we really start identifying where the challenges are that are HR related, even in the leadership team, because in order to do this, everyone on that team needs to be willing to explore something and say, well, maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe there's something else I can look at here as a team and really come together and look at this and say, let's look at a common challenge here and work using something else besides maybe the tools you've used already. And maybe they have something like this in place already. If it does, they're probably in good shape. But a lot of people don't have this. All right. Thanks for the question, Nisa. I'm sure there'll be others that I know you do. You do that well. Let's take a look now at the level. I'm going to go through some definitions here that are facets of this model. We'll go down one level on this. We've already talked about 7 stages of growth. And remember what I stated about Fisher's research identifying 7 stages in an organization. And organizations from a startup up to 500 employees, it can actually probably go beyond 500 and what those stages are. So let's go ahead and take a look at those right now. There's stage 1. That's 1 to 10 people. That's a startup, identifies a startup. Then stage 2 is 11 to 19, which is a ramp up. Stages 3 is a 20 to 34, which is delegation. Stage 4 is 35 to 57. That's called the professional stage. And these definitions are just ways that Fisher tagged these, by the way. And we'll explain more about those in a minute. Stage 5 is 58 to 95. And strategic is stage 6, 96 to 160. And then 161 to 500 is a visionary stage 7. So those are the stages broken out that the numbers fit pretty much into those patterns. So let's now look at some more information about the facets here. I'm going to cover a number of bullet points here at a very high level. We're not going to go through the detail of all this today, and I know when I'm even putting this together, it's like, oh my gosh, your head will explode by looking at this. So I'm just giving you information here, but it's not to try to absorb it all, but I think it's important to give you insight to the depth of what this process does and helps an organization look at. We as consultants make this much easier because we guide people through the process. But if you look at this and try to figure it out on your own and didn't have any kind of expertise, because Anissa and I are both certified through this process, that you could really get bogged down in this just trying to figure it all out. So keep that in mind as we go through these. And want to make sure that if you have any questions when we get to this list right here that we give you a little time to ask a question if you have one. So you have the 7 stages of growth. And you have 3 gates of focus, and those 3 gates are revenue, people, and process. So let me explain that briefly. As you go through the different stages, there's a priority that these fit into. And Nisa asked this question the other day about profit. That's something you should always be focused on. That's a true statement. But it may not be the top priority of the gates of focus depending on the stage you're in. It could be that stage profit's important, but maybe it's because of what's being done as far as developing people. The people need to be the number one focus in those get through those gates. And so
one of the things I wanted to touch point on that is that when we are looking to compare our current trajectory and our strategic priorities against what other organizations have done to successfully navigate to the next stage of growth, what James Fisher has provided is a model to say, there are stages in which cash flow and revenue is the number one, and frankly, let's take stage 1 startup, the only priority at some points in a startup's life. However, what the research has shown, right, is that when an organization fails to rearrange their priorities at the next stage and at the next stage, and there are times at which revenue or cash flow, for example, shifts around in focus. And when they fail to shift, fail to recognize that, say, for example, and you'll get into this shortly, but when an organization fails to move from a cash flow focus to a process focus,
exactly,
what ends up happening is a trajectory that is in peril. Basically, it's a trajectory that could end up in failure as compared to what exactly do successful organizations do at this stage. Is that right?
Yeah, it shines a spotlight on the things that really need to be looked at. And none of this is black and white. I mean, it can vary. But you said it well, that when Fisher looked at and analyzed the really successful companies and he homogenized all the data, these are the things that showed up, and these patterns, the priorities of these things we're going through this list of stuff here on this page, are the things identified that the most profitable, the most well-organized, the most people-related, orientated companies fell into these patterns. It's not an absolute, but having that as a guidepost, at least stake in the ground, to say, let's look at our situation, our organization, it creates that roadmap to ask that question. And you hit it well. Process, as we go through a little later here, the process becomes a priority because as you grow in certain size, if you don't have process and documentation and those things done well, you're going to get very chaotic in a hurry because you can't manage all that with a larger number of people in these larger stages. So that's a very clear point. Excellent question. Thank you. All right. The next thing are the three faces of a leader blend. This one outlines the percentage that is appropriate that the leader should be using in this blend, depending again on stage. And those are visionary, manager, and specialist. As you can imagine, early stage, the CEO, the owner of that company, is going to be the specialist because they either have a product or process that they believe in, they created, and they found a market for it, and that's where they're going to be spending their time. And as you can imagine, later in the organization, they're now stage 7, they've got 500 employees, that leader needs to be more visionary. And this kind of breaks out those three facets, and again, what stage you're in, which one needs to be the priority. It doesn't mean the other two go away, but there is a primary focus around those. Now, modalities, type of leadership needed. This is a little more complex because it's either CEOs, managers, or staff. You have those three levels in organization. In those three levels, there's either going to be a time for one of them to be dominant, facilitative, or supportive. For example, the CEO will be dominant in the lower stages, but he's going to, or she's going to be more facilitative in one of the higher stages. And again, it gives an outline map to help a person evaluate where they are and how they're using time, and are they matching up with the modality they need to be in the stage they're in. 27 challenges, these hidden agents, 5 per stage. This is something we're going to take a deeper dive in. We're going to look at 7 stages, and we're going to go through these hidden agents, these 5 per stage. And what I mean by that, there are actually 27 challenges that Fisher found, identified, but in each one of the 7 stages, there's 5 primary ones that he identified, again, based on those highly functioning companies, were the ones they focused on the most. And these can vary. Part of the process of doing a consultation work with an organization is to give them the ones that we're seeing here, but an organization may have 1 or 2 that are working well, and therefore there may be another one that's placed. But at least that beginning roadmap outlines the one, are you doing these 5 well? Are you being effective with them? There's 27, but you don't have to worry about all 27. That's one of the cool things about it. It helps you focus down on what really needs to be focused on. Then you have builder-protector ratios, and that is another thing that's outlined, and it comes out of the feedback you get from doing the analytical process, is what builder-protector percentage. It could be 1 to 1, it could be maybe 3 to 1, and therefore the risk of the builder and what you're doing needs to be more focused on a higher ratio number than being a protector, and that falls into place depending on the stage again. And finally, the leadership style focus. This is described in Daniel Goleman's work. He's got 6 styles there: visionary, coaching, pace-setting, democratic, affiliative, and commanding. And there's 3 of these in each stage that fall into a category of primary, secondary, and auxiliary. So that covers much of what is gone through when a leadership team goes through this process to really drive out, to get clear about their objectives and what they're going to do as far as actions going forward as they are identifying the stage they're in. Now, I want to pause here for a minute and find out, is there any questions anybody has around this?
Lots of questions, but I think that you're going to get into some of the answers that, especially I think you said you're going to talk about the 27 challenges.
Yes.
eagerness is to hear. You say there's 5 per stage, so depending on
Yeah.
the level of organization. And what we've discovered is that once an organization is over the 500 mark, then many of these same challenges are departmental in nature or unit
Yeah.
in nature. Organizations that are larger, the 170,000 employees, for example, still have these. We can map still the same level of strategic roadmap, but then it becomes departmental or unit driven as opposed to entire organization driven. Is that accurate?
Yeah, it certainly is, especially if you look at organizations, again, those large Fortune 500s or whatever, if they're run well from top down, you will have a senior level person, executive, over a certain group that really is given an entrepreneurial freedom to really to run their business, to drive the business. That delegation has been pushed down to where it's run well that way. Then that individual and that groups of his or her leaders can do the same thing in an organization, right? And again, that 500 number can vary obviously to some degree, but absolutely. Good observation again. Okay, so what are we going to do here? I mean, we covered a lot of information, and now we're going to talk a little bit about what we're going to cover and really achieve today. We're going to take a look at those 7 stages and the 5 unique challenges organizations face in each one of those stages. And that's the things we want to narrow this down. We're not going to go through the other things I pointed out in that brief thing before. It's going to be focused on these 2 things. And then what your organization can gain from managing the growth curve. So let's step into that now. And look at, again, these 7 stages. So there again is what we have in the organization, and I want to repeat one more time what Fisher really found out here, and I love the way it's wording, is that organizations, as they increase in size, the complexity of that organization isn't due to revenue or profit or equity growth. That's not where the complexities and issues usually come from. It's the one factor that you can't control, and that is your people. And so that's what we're going to cover down through this process here, and you'll see where this shows up a lot in these different challenges within stages. So what I've done is I went ahead and listed the 27 challenges. We're not going to cover all of these because we're just going to pick out the 5 from each one of the stages, but I want you to be able to have access to this. And if you listen to this audio again and go through them, you can see. And one of the things I want to point out, if you just kind of peruse over these, you'll see a lot of them are related to HR. They're people challenges. And so as you see what's been identified here, it really substantiates the importance of our connection through HR with the leaders and the value this can bring. Hiring quality staff, for an example. Even growth plans. When you think about it, it takes people to develop those growth plans. So business-related things are still people-related, but a lot of them are specifically employee turnover challenge. You know, how do you identify the best people to get them on the right bus and the right seat on the bus? That's some of the things that we do at Turnkey to help people organize and do. So I just want you to have the full list before we step in these. Go ahead.
Even just looking at this list, if we think about it in terms of, if nothing else, knowing that every organization, no matter what they believe their challenges are, it can be summed up to whatever the challenge, it falls into one of these buckets, one of these 27. Yes. And that clarity in and of itself can support critical thinking or strategic thinking initiatives.
Absolutely. Well, again, let me give you just something I thought about here is, if a CEO wanted to just do the analytics on this, the thing we started this whole thing with, they just wanted information, they could contract with us just to run those instruments and have his or her leaders respond to it and get that data, get that information. And, they may want to talk to us a little bit just to get a feeling of what they're looking at there, that we could come in and do a consult with them on what they're looking at. And they could take that information right there and disseminate a lot of actions around it without even having to work with it, so they just wanted to do that. Because this, again, can really open the eyes of what their challenges are. And one of the things that, we do in these is we offer that to a leader to be able to do that and then look at it and extrapolate whether or not they want to really take a deep dive into do a 2-day process to go through this, because now they got the information. and they can decide what they want to do with it at that time. You know, we've talked about that, right? More than once.
Yep.
So, all right. So that's the 27 of them all together. So now let's take a look, and we're going to break these down, starting with that stage 1, which is a startup company. And what I'm going to go through now is I'm going to, out of those 27 you just looked at there, I'm going to identify the top 5 that James Fisher identified as the most functioning and well-organized company that were able to grow through these stages. These are the 5 that identified that are most optimal. And like I want to state again, it doesn't mean that organization is not doing some of these well, or maybe they're doing well, and maybe something else they want to look at 27. But this gives you at least a starting point to ask that question and then analyze what you're discovering from that. So here are the 5 for the stage 1. Cash flow, which we've already talked about. That's the priority. Destabilized by chaos. Slow product development and getting it to market. And limited capital to grow. And improve sales.
Just to clarify, what you're sharing with us right now is pretty obvious, right? We know that as a stage 1 startup company, these are typical. But what you're also about to share with us is as that company grows, these challenges will or will not remain the same as we get into stage 2 and stage 3.
Some of these pass on down through, as you'll see, but most of them, especially get higher, are going to change quite a bit. That's the point. Out of the 27, we don't stay with the same 5, obviously. That's part of what he found out here, and that's what his research helps organizations do, is to look at the ones that are identified based on the stage they're in, and they can analyze themselves. Where are these things, and are we doing these well or not? Or if we're, and I'll touch on this, I don't want to jump in too much right now, but as you get close to moving from one stage to the next, you know, what are you doing about preparing for that one coming up next that some of these change? And I'll cover a little more about that in a minute. So absolutely, these things vary. So there's your 5 there. And I will tell you too, and this goes without saying, this company size is very CEO-centric. The CEO is one making those stage. They need to have the most expertise. They're hiring people. When they start hiring people, they're not concerned necessarily about them being an expert in anything. They're just hiring somebody that really does fit well with the team and works well and is driven. And they will train them a lot of times to do different things because they have to wear different hats. And so do the people that's working a company this size oftentimes. All right, so the next stage, and you'll see some of these change. Hiring quality people. Improve sales, that stays in their cash flow. Now you see it in a different order right now, but obviously it's still very important. The leadership gap, because you start having some of that, and limited capital to grow. Because if you're trying to hire people, well, how's your sales going and how's your cash flow going that you can afford, because now you're really needing to all put more work and spread it, and therefore these priorities, and they're self-explanatory when you look at these right now. This is still very CEO-centric at this time. As you move up close to the 19, get ready to go to the next stage, there needs to begin to be a shift. And that's where hiring quality people comes in, because as you get ready to go in this next stage, we're going to see a change here in what the CEO does. And the CEO, and this is one of the challenges CEO and entrepreneur people have, it's a common thing with them, the new shiny rock thing syndrome, because they can create a lot of chaos because they get bored with something very quickly and want to move on. That's the nature of an entrepreneurial person. And some of that discipline needs to be there. Is don't do that until you make sure you've got things running well that somebody else can manage if you're going to be exploring other things. But don't bring chaos into the organization just because you want to look at something new and different.
Well, that reminds me, that's exactly right. That reminds me of, I'm reading a really great book called 1 to 0 by Peter Thiel, the former founder of PayPal. And one of the things that the story, the anecdote that he shares is the rise and fall and eventual where they are now of HP. And in what you're looking at, I'm going to share that anecdote in a second, but when we're looking at stage 2, what you don't see on the challenges is, for example, new product development. And oftentimes that's because in stage 1 and stage 2, a startup knows. They know what our products are, right? Or at least you should if you're in business.
Exactly. Yeah,
and
if you're doing well, you got to get pretty yes.
New product development falls into that, is it a distraction? And so when organizations put as their priority new at the wrong stage, then that too can be an issue. And one of the things that in that book, 0 to 1, Peter Thiel talks about is it was, I want to say, it was 1990, wasn't it, when HP was worth about $9 billion. And within that decade, they had the revenue, I want to say it was like midpoint of year 2000, the revenue was at $135 billion. And they did it through new product innovations. It was early 90s when they came out with the Office Jet, that first affordable color printer. And then almost immediately following, they came out with one of the first usable portable laptops. And then immediately following that, it was the Office Jet. I mean, I remember that first Office Jet where you could scan, fax, print, color. Even though we didn't like the price of the ink, we were super excited about that innovation. And then by 2000, they were at 135 billion, and there was some discord in the board, and there was an issue in regards to one half of the board thought we need to continue what's worked for us, new product innovation. The other half of the board said, no, we should be hands off. We need to look at services, and need to look at rebranding, but let's just ride on what we've got going. And so instead of continuing on that trajectory, they took a gamble. And within the next 5 years, they were down to half of what they were in 2000. So now in 5 years, let's say 2005, they're down to 70 billion. Now, 70 billion sounds really great. But if you're at 135 billion and you go back to 70 billion, now you're looking at the reasons for the massive layoffs and the massive discord and loss of stock value, et cetera. And
marketplace,
marketplace, right? So what you're sharing with us is a roadmap that allows organizations to see where are we and what's coming up for us if we want to continue to grow. So in the gates of focus or in the priorities, it would allow an organization to see what do we need to focus on here: people, process, revenue, et cetera, and what are the challenges that we're going to have if we don't pay attention to what the stage we are in. Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, that's half of it. The other half is, by doing this, is what do we not need to be focusing on right now?
That's right.
Because, that's the whole point, is getting clear and everybody pointing in the same direction, focusing on the same things, and really understand the reasons why they are doing this, the importance of it, including the CEO, because, again, the chaos that the CEO can bring simply because of how they're wired. Understanding and having that discipline to run this organization is to make sure things are in place here, and I'm not going off in many different directions, and also then pulling people all kinds of directions. And there's a whole other thing to talk about what that creates mentally and emotionally through research and science now, and you and I have talked about that briefly, Denise, so we're not going to cover that today, but it creates all kinds of problems around those kinds of things. Excellent. Okay. As a matter of fact, one of the things you're talking about would be hiring this thing. The innovative product and everything comes up in one of these later stages. And I'll use an example of where it's the reverse thing with Apple here in a little bit too. Okay, so the delegation, here are the 5 for the delegation, 20 to 34 people. Staff buy-in, leadership staff gap, and weak business design, core values unclear, and cultural resistance to change. Now you're starting to see some things that really tie to people and the well-being of them and the clarity of it. This is where the CEO needs to begin delegating. Therefore, he or she needs to have some directs that really they can push the information or the drive down to run things at some degree here and start taking their hands off. This is a very, very difficult challenge for many of these people. Because control, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but that has come up in so many ways, in so many areas, about how we as human beings want to control everything. We have a very difficult understanding of what we can control ourselves and what we should be and what we should not be controlling, which is most everything else. And therefore, it plays in the business the same way. The gap, what you can be there is because CEO may not have that much direct contact with the people down the line. And so how can the values be made to be clear? because that needs to be clearly stated, and everybody needs to be on the same page and really understand, why are we here? Why does it matter what we're doing? And why does it matter to the world out there, and have a passion for that? And that be able to be clear and stated, because that CEO is no longer going to have that direct contact with people. And everybody, and Apple again is one of those examples of a place where that was really made clear by Steve Jobs, and everybody hired there understood that what they were doing. They were there to challenge the status quo. That's one of their foundation things. So that's on this one. All right, so the next one, professional stage, 35 to 57. Weak project management, difficulty diagnosing problems, employee turnover, not getting systems in place, and organization uniform about the company growth. You start still seeing this communication problem, project management. Now you're starting to see things that are maybe a little more professional level here. The diagnosing problems. Again, if you haven't been doing the things we're talking about doing right here, and you've got this discipline in place where you're kind of doing this evaluation, it may be difficult to understand how do we go about diagnosing problems. And turnover, because now you can start having breakdown in communication, and the challenge you have where you have people that are communicating differently, and therefore they come into conflict because they don't understand different types of styles. That's a very simple example of how this works and how these play into place. But as Nisa pointed out, we're starting to see a lot of different, out of that 27, a lot of different of these challenges that are coming into place here. Okay, stage 5. Now you're going to make another leap here with this one. This one's going to be a very impactful one, to where many organizations really don't make it to here and get through this. Improved sales, difficulty forecasting problems, cost of lost expertise, people leaving organizations that have now got some intellectual property or something they've really developed or done, weak business design, and staff training. So this is where you can run.
Take a moment right here. We are working with a client, 70 employees, 75 actually, and they are an entrepreneurial organization, have created extreme success for themselves through acquisitions and being very opportunistic and being willing to take risks, and they're at that place where the executive team and managing partners are still very much involved in the sales and decision making all the way down the line. And what's happening though is the turnover at the other levels. They're really having a hard time understanding, why are we having turnover? Why are our folks not taking initiative? And one of the things that, as we've observed in working with them, is almost everything you are pointing out here. Now, they are really good at sales, so they continue to make sales, but the challenge is improving sales over last quarter, right? They are absolutely having difficulty seeing what's coming up next for us. A few years ago, they had a challenge where, we'll just say due to some economic crises, they had to lay off quite a few people, and it really damaged the culture and hurt morale. But they were at the same stage that they're at now when that happened 4 or 5 years ago. And if they are not able, right, if their history is going to repeat itself, if they're not able to forecast what's coming up and use that data to respond proactively, not reactively, but proactively, they're going to continue to have employee turnover, and then that cost of that lost expertise. Their business design itself is entrepreneurial, so it worked in stage 1 and stage 2, maybe even stage 3 and 4. But now they've got all these people, and if it's always entrepreneurial, it's what's in front of us. How can we seize that opportunity, as opposed to, is it aligned with our strategic objectives? And how do we make sure our staff is properly trained to continue long-term success? So this is almost exactly what they're experiencing, only the executive team doesn't have, they're a little bit blind to it, because from their perspective, well, what we've been doing is pretty successful, or we wouldn't be as successful as we are, so we must be doing something right. And
well, they
so
probably are doing some things right.
absolutely.
They probably are some things, yeah. But I would say the health organization, if you're having turnover and those numbers and those turnovers, you know, they're easy enough to measure. Is this like it's normal business situation or not? You know, how happy are people there? Are they confused about there? Are they unhappy because of all kinds of reasons? Now you've got definitive personnel problems. And the way I would always look at it, of course, you have to have a leadership team that's willing to do this. You know, the problem's out there. The problem can't be out there. The problem's got to be with us. We're the leaders here. What are we missing here that some things are happening down the line here, and what do I need to look at myself about first here and determine that? And that's hard for us to do. That's really hard to do because
you got it.
Yeah.
This information shines a spotlight on what to look for. If you're if a company is at stage 5 and they are experiencing growth, are they also experiencing these challenges? And with that kind of clarity, it allows them to say, where do we really want to put our attention? Is it just
where should we put our attention?
Barrel through the same way we've always done it, or should we take a step back and say, wait a second, are we having difficulty forecasting problems? Maybe we are. What is our business design? Is it solid? Is it strong? Is it predictably going to take us into the future? What are our staff training? And in the example I'm talking about, there's 0 staff training. It's get in, we work hard here, you'll get paid well, but get to work, right? And there's very little training.
It sounds like one of the things that I would hear, it sounds like to me that I'd really want to investigate. They're missing the human factor. They're missing the people. That's the most important thing in the company. It sounds like I believe they think they are doing well in that, and maybe some cases. But I'd really wonder about that. And there's a way to evaluate a company and get feedback around that and find out if they are really not connecting people. So
you got it. Having this
it shines a light on it.
Microscope on where are you. Where is the company compared to other organizations who have successfully gotten to the next level? And are these challenges your challenges? And are you doing something about it? And this, combined with the other things that you mentioned that we won't have time to go over, but the gates of focus, the leadership styles, etc., gives an organization the strategic roadmap as well as the analytics to make mindful decisions.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt.
Good point. That's perfect. We'll jump onto these right here because I want to point this one out. Say the company has been healthy and they've been going through the process and they've come to now the stage 6. This is where things really change, takes a real different direction. Because up to now, you've been hiring people and putting them in place, whatever thing, and it could be pretty entrepreneurial. But here's where it changes at this stage here, because now you start to play with the big boys, even though you may not be nearly the size. You're going to start becoming visible. If you step into this arena here with organizations or your competitors, it could be a lot larger. And one of the things that you want to do too is you want to start hiring people that really have a corporate background, because now you're looking more of a corporate style. You're going to have that feel. And if you really have a very good vision, a very strong one, you really have a vibrant marketplace entrenchment, then one thing you can do a lot of times is hire a person from a corporate big environment, because they want to work for a small organization that's moving and shaking. And you can go raid them, because those big organizations may come try to raid you or even buy you out. So this is where you start really shining to the public out there in an awareness when you hit this level. And so this staff buying is very important, satisfaction. You can realize the profit relationship, and look at that. This kind of sounds what the company you're talking about may have an issue around. Staff satisfaction, profit relationship not seen. The people they're not feeling like they really belong. What are we doing here? What's my purpose in this? And do I feel like I have the organization that really is on fire for me? It goes back again to HR and people challenges and things. All right, so the very last one is product not differentiated. Now here's something I want to talk a little bit about. Apple, for an example. Steve Jobs, everybody knows, got fired from Apple. The board took over, and then chaos ensued. And when Steve was brought back in, I think it was like 13 different computers. And he saw that when he came in. And one of the questions he asked is, which one do I know to buy for what I want to use? And so he brought everybody together, and all this was going on. And he said, stop. Listen, here's what we're going to do. And he built a square, a 4-box square up there. And he said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to have computers that are going to either be the desktop or the portable on one side, and then it's either going to be business or personal. And that's it. We're not doing 13. We're going to do 4. And if you look today, that's what they got. And so this profit differentiating and getting offerings designed to market and things, you know, have you really got your plate? Are you clear about your products? And are you being innovative and you're designing things? And so now you're really hitting more of what you see business side. But keep in mind, the only way you could be here doing this well is that you've done the work to really get the right type of employee in the place that understands what your mission is and understand what's driving the marketplace with this company, and you have a passion and your own fire for working on whatever it is they're looking to achieve. So that covers it, and I noticed that we're, let's see, we're still 10 minutes out, aren't we? Still got 10 minutes.
We are. I do have a question. So what you've shared with us are the 7 stages and the challenges. Can you talk briefly about the leadership piece, the different styles regarding the visionary versus the supportive roles, and why is it important to understand where an organization's growth is, where they are along the growth curve in regards to supporting their leadership team in shifting where they are to perhaps where they need to be for that particular stage?
I'm not sure I quite understand your question yet.
That's because it was a long-winded rattle. let me try again. let me try again. I want to understand.
Yeah, help me.
One of the things that we see very often, I'll give you another example. We have a client that has a leader who technically very effective when they brought him in after 3 different mergers to, frankly, do the cleanup. Get in there, pick out the high performers, demand more from this vertical, and clean out the riffraff, right? And he did. And he got that department in tip-top shape. Within 6 months, it was generating the revenue beyond expectations. Now let's fast forward 18 months, 2 years later. Now he is still in that cleanup mode. He's still the command and control type leader. Well, now the organization and his unit is, I want to say his unit is 300 plus employees, right? So now he's still trying to do the command and control leadership, but his organization has shifted. Why is it important for him to understand and evolve his leadership?
Yeah. I can point this out to you because we're talking about the 3 phases of the leaders. You have the visionary, manager, and specialist, right? And so what it sounded like to me, because he was brought in to put out a fire and make a change, which is that, and if anybody's ever been around those kind of people, that's an enormously difficult role because you probably are going to change people's lives and those kinds of things, and the sensitivity to that and all that's very important. But that means that person's probably going to be more of a specialist doing that work, and manager being secondary or whatever, and so the percentage of the time in that particular role doing that makes sense. Somewhere in the transition, though, as you begin to clean this up and you identify the people that are going to be running the areas, because you said it sounds like a stage 7, so it's somewhere in that stage. So there's going to be direct reports in there reporting up to someone. And so let me give you the percentage example that Fisher identified. For an example, literally by stage 7, that leader should be 75% visionary. That means not out there dictating and delegating. I mean, delegating and not dictating and not driving and not making decisions. That should be a visionary position now, 75%. Manager, only 20%. And the specialist, maybe doing what was doing hands-on before, is only 5% at that level. That's the kind of information that shows.
You're saying at that stage, the CEO, or in this case, the unit manager, the unit VP.
Yes. Yep.
The primary modality for the leader is what at this stage?
The 3 faces of that leader would be 75% visionary, 20% manager, and 5% specialist. And what I would say when he first came in there, he was doing probably specialist and manager and really heavy loaded and doing very little visionary because it was just a matter of cleaning up. Now, it doesn't mean the visionary had been cast because they were wanting to make a change, reason they brought the person in, but it's a lot of hands-on because he's having to remove people, rearrange people, and things like that. But now that they're where they are and it sounds like they've got that cleaned up, he's having difficulty making that transition. And here's the thing. Maybe he doesn't want to be a person that's the visionary and doing it to where hands off. Maybe what this person likes and where they're really gifted is going in and fighting those fires and being in that position. And after that, they're boring. It's hard to let go. So I guess one of the things I'm kind of ranting on about here is that also aligning people to where you're really using their talents the way they're really meant to be used, and they can be most used in what their responsibility is. That's part of what we do, Anissa, in our science-based assessments, is help people identify. They help organizations make sure they get the right people on the right bus and the right seats. So I don't want to get off of much of that, but does that make sense? I mean, that's kind of what you have going on there.
It does, and I know that we are coming up to 5 minutes before, so I certainly, if anyone's on the call that has a question, don't hesitate to type that in. But Roger, if you were to say, if there were one takeaway that in all of your business consulting and executive coaching and strategic planning that you've done, when an organization undertakes this kind of analytics to realign with the most important strategies, what's the one aha or takeaway that you would say always brings you back to, I'm so glad we did this work?
Okay, well, let me point out what we do by doing the very piece here. I think this will answer. It's going to be a few bullets here, but this is why this is important to talk about here, because and this is the way it matters to me and where we see the results of this. So let's say somebody's going through this process. What we've done with these leaders now, we've put words to the top 5 critical issues, and what I said earlier, you can't really claim it if you haven't named it. So if you go through this process and people have done that analytic work and everything, now you've got those leaders to where they have identified their top critical issues. And again, we don't go in and say, these are the ones that come out this way it's got to be. What we've done is by opening the door to provide information of what we show to be, then as they go through a couple of days of really doing the analytical work and we work with them through this process, they have now created that and identified their top 5. That means all the other noise can be quieted down, put away for now. And the CEO now also have information about the team and how they define the top challenges. One of the things I said was that the team may have different ideas of what the priorities are, and the CEO, through those analytics reports, get to see where those people are in that. Then it aligns the company's goals and objectives. I mean, as you see, this is critical. And people may say they're that way, but until you go through this process, you may realize, and like you're talking about the company earlier, some of these things may be what they're missing. They may be not clear about their objectives and what their role as leaders are in that organization. Forces deeper discussion. And one thing that we've learned here, when people start talking about these things and start sharing their ideas and start getting on the same page, they can really actually can address those challenges now because they're doing it as an organized team. CEO leader address more strategic issues. There's where you can be able to look ahead, because now you're really taking care of today's problems, where it frees you up because everybody's agreed to what the problems are and now they can deal with them. And then tracking critical issues builds confidence. I mean, that's the one thing I think you are talking about this organization. You may have a lot of people that don't have much confidence in the organization or whatever, but the leadership going through this process, their confidence is solid, and when theirs is, that pushes down. I don't know if that really answered what you're asking. But that's
well, it
what
does.
It
was what's the outcome that people take away with, and CEO and leadership address more strategic issues once everyone agrees to the problems. I mean, the communication clarity that comes with that. So I know that we are at our final minutes. I wanted to say thank you to everyone that has joined. We are going to have some follow-up sessions on this process, as well as using analytics to predict your company's future. I think that this is a pretty comprehensive subject, and so we're not going to be able to cover everything that we really wanted today, it looks like, and perhaps I interrupted too much, Roger.
No,
but
one
of the things I want to make sure that folks on the call know, if you are interested to see if the stages of growth is a good fit for you or your organization, don't hesitate to reach out to David Whitmarsh, or if you're on this webinar and would like to reach out directly to us, my name is Anissa Avon, and I can be reached at our website, www.turnkeycoachingsolutions.com, or 281 469-4244. But also, of course, David Whitmarsh is sponsoring this event today, and he can direct you as to how to connect with us. So, Roger, in wrapping things up, how would you summarize an organization's experience once they have gone through the process of looking at the analytics?
The experience I've had, and you and I experienced this together, work with organization, that the leader, because there is a thing I'm going to get into right now where this information is captured in a single large plot, and that leader told me like 6 months later he still refers to that and sees where they are in the direction of what they got after they went through this process and got clear and really defined their objectives. That he still referred to it, and it was an easy thing to look at because he kept it kind of back behind his desk thing or whatever. He pulled it up, and he had his team look at it. It stayed right there in front of him, and it created that focus. And it was around how we're dealing with people and the challenges around that, and are we being functioning at a high level to where everybody knows what we're here for, what we're doing, and this process gave them clear directions of what that looks like now and what it looks like moving forward. I guess that's a long answer, but that's what we've experienced while working.
Yeah, because I know that we have a number of case studies that we are happy to share if someone would like to see a few case studies, or we also have some information regarding the different stages that we'll be happy to share. Just give us a ring, and we can provide a complimentary consultation on the strategic planning process. But what I just heard, though, in wrapping up, is that it becomes a part of their strategic or their culture, their culture to be more strategic and to review where they are compared to where they believe they are and where they're headed in order to be deliberate about planning their success.
Yeah, the confidence they have because now they know they have a process that they can go through and do this as a repeated thing, and know they can anticipate an outcome that's going to be something that's they're confident that it's going to be clear to them. So absolutely.
Very nice. Very nice. Okay, well, before we wrap up, if there's any questions, don't hesitate to reach out and we can handle those. But Roger, any final thoughts?
No, I'm through.
You're through.
Except this has been fun to do. I enjoyed doing it, that's for sure. And so, yeah.
Well, and thank you, everyone, for attending today. We appreciate your time and look forward to hearing about your goals.